Greetings, and welcome to the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. In each episode, host Kirill Tokarev invites video game industry leaders to talk about the world of game development. No topic is off limits as long as it relates to video game development. New episodes are in the works, so remember to follow us or subscribe and share with someone you know will also enjoy the podcast.
First of all, I want to thank you for finding the time and joining me today on the podcast. Before we kind of jump into it and start talking about like game design and games today and so on, can you do like a little intro? Tell us a little bit about what have you been working before, where you are right now, and so on.
Sure. So I'm Troy Dunniway. I am the department head and creator of the Game Design Diploma program at CG Spectrum. And I've been making games now for almost 30 years. I actually started in movie visual effects, and I spent 5 years doing special effects, and then kind of transitioned. I wanted to do stuff that was a little bit more creative, and so I thought, hey, why don't I get into games? And so my first job was actually as an art director, and doing art in games. But I wasn't in games for more than just a few weeks, and they saw a story I was writing. They said, oh, you should write the story for the game too. And then a few weeks later, I was suddenly a game designer. I never really meant to become a game designer. I've always been a bit of a jack of all trades and somebody that can do a lot of things. And so I kind of was lucky and I fell into it, but I also fell into it, back in like 1992, 93, when, there really wasn't even a job of game designer yet. There wasn't any books written. You couldn't pick up a book and say like how to be a game designer. There was no schools, you just had to learn it. And so I kind of came from that old school realm, and I spent a lot of my career, about half of my career at big publishers, Microsoft and EA and Ubisoft and let's see, Disney, Samsung, all these big things at executive level. I was worldwide creative director, at a lot of companies. So I've been both in the creative direction role as well as the management side, being studio head and general manager type. So I'm kind of one of those guys that came from the trenches, came from, a technical and art background, went into game design, and then went into management. And I kind of juggle all of those, today. But I've overseen, a lot of big projects like Rainbow Six Vegas or, the Age of Empires franchise, Command & Conquer, things like that. Worked on the Ratchet and Clank series, Insomniac, just a lot of really big games, everything from AAA shooters to RPGs like Fable to console, PC, mobile, and kind of just a little bit of everything. And so I'm somebody that's just kind of been in and around pretty much all aspects of the game development side, and so for me it's great because every day is a little different, but it's something that allows me to use my really vast set of interests and backgrounds. My degrees are actually in astrophysics and mechanical engineering, and so I was actually a rocket scientist even before I went into visual effects. So I've always been somebody that just has a lot of interests in a lot of things, and that, the job of game designer I fell into, and, it's been a great career.
Troy, thank you for this wonderful introduction, and I'm so happy to learn that you're actually coming from the VFX community and everything, because we have the core of our community are actually people who are doing visual effects in games, and they're creating 3D content and simulations and all this stuff. So they're, I think, interested in how they can grow from there, because you can excel and grow at what you're doing, just doing like visual effects and 3D content and stuff. But there are other opportunities, and I think it's always beneficial to kind of know how you can develop and kind of grow in maybe a different area. And the question I have is, you mentioned you were working with math, you were like a rocket scientist, and this is the question that we get a lot from people who want to go into game design, because some of them might kind of read like the Theory of Fun, like the Ralph Costner book, and be inspired to kind of go there. But when they try it and they go, to do an interview or something, they actually start to get a lot of questions about like, how do you balance that out? They're getting questions about, spreadsheets and all that other stuff. And I'm wondering if you can explain, so in general, game design, is this more art, or is this just math, or is it just a combination? So how do you kind of navigate this area, and do you actually need to be like a rocket scientist to start kind of getting into it?
So it's a tough question, because there's a lot of different game designer jobs, right? There's a lot of different roles. And so you can come into game design, with no background and just be somebody that's just interested in games and kind of be a generalist and just not sure, if you're, a kid coming out of high school or something and want to get into it. Like, you don't have to have a background in something to become a game designer. But if you come in with art skills, technical skills, or some other skills, it's a job that allows you to leverage those into a stronger role if you want to go into that subspecialty, if that makes sense. I can explain that in a minute. But a game designer is about being the master of fun. And that's what's the hard thing, is it's an unquantifiable thing. We have to kind of use, I like to say, the art and the science behind it. Meaning I need to use my head, but I need to use my heart, right? I need to use my gut. So my head is like the instinctual thing, like data collection. Like I look at something, I analyze it, I understand it, from a somewhat technical side. And I say technical, like even the science of psychology is used very deeply in game design. I use psychology every day, memory mapping theories, all these kinds of things. I use very deep psychology. I read a lot of psychology. So there's psychology as a science that's used in our art form, right? So as a game designer, we're often following our gut and our instinct, not realizing we're actually using methods in psychology that have been developed, for long periods of time. And that's where we get into these problems. Every company is a little different. Like, for example, Zynga, when they do game design, they're very analytical. They go and they focus test everything, and everything's, user data and things like that. Other companies are like, yeah, there's a game designer there that's like, that feels fun to me, right? And that's how we work. And so you're kind of using a little bit of everything, but you've got to use like all these skills. And that's why the job's so hard. People think it's just playing video games all day, and it's not. It's very much like, hey, I gotta, today, I'm trying to, demonstrate how a level comes together, and I gotta be drawing it out, and I'm using some art skills. And I mean, I don't need to be an artist, but I need to have ways to communicate visually, and I need to be able to express to my team members. Now, the smaller the team gets, the more generalized I have to get. So on a really small team, I might need to build the art myself. I might need to do everything. On a much larger team, because remember, like a lot of big teams now are 1,000+ people. Whereas a small indie team could be 10 people, and so the job of game designer varies dramatically depending on the size of team you're on and things like that. So you'll have to have more specific skills on smaller, more indie teams, and more specific skills, be the master of that one thing, if you're on a really large team. And that's why, again, it's hard to know what skill set you need, but having a general understanding of everything is important. Now, from like a technical perspective, I think that is something that's really hard if you don't have any knack for spreadsheets to, even just scripting. You don't need to be a programmer. That's the misconception. You do not need to know how to do C, C++, and the more hardcore engineering side of that. But you do need to understand scripting, like being able to do blueprints in Unreal, things like that. That's either visual language or text-based scripting like Python or something. That is a skill set that you do need to have. So if you have no aptitude in like math, and you don't like it, game design is not a good fit for you, because, I work just as much in Excel writing crazy spreadsheets with massive formulas and all sorts of stuff. And that's, very math driven, but I also am like, scripting stuff in Unreal, and that's very math driven. And even the way I work and I write documents is very logical. If you understand the sense of like how something needs to flow and how you build things out, you need that like engineering mindset of like how to analyze things and break them into systems, right?
I just wanted to kind of emphasize that what you say when you're talking about logic, I think this is like the key thing in game design in general, right? Because even if you're starting working on mind maps, and if you're doing any kind of, you work with management, right? So you understand kind of how to work. So when you understand that if something happens, then something happens, when you're interested in these connections, then you kind of, this is actually is game design. You just need to make them kind of grow into bigger systems and kind of develop from there.
Yeah, and it sounds really easy on paper, and then when you actually go to try to do that as a working game designer, it's like 1,000 times harder than you realize, because breaking things down in their systems and their what I call systemic thinking, and be able to understand how they work within themselves, but also how they work in conjunction with each other. And that's where people start losing their minds, because they're like, I don't understand, like, how does the combat system over here interact with the health system, interact with the movement system, interacts with my level design. You know, all these are different systems that maybe different designers are implementing, and you implement them individually or design them individually, but they interact, in conjunction. And if you can't understand the logical kind of flow of those things and that kind of object-oriented programming, that object-oriented thinking, especially like emergent gameplay. Emergent's all about, like, you don't put, like, say, fire specifically on an object. You build fire as a system, and then fire can work on different types of objects and categories and things. It's a different way of thinking, right? And it is logical, and that's what it's all about, right?
So, Troy, you mentioned this, like, that game design is kind of like this melting pot of different things. So you need to know a little bit of psychology. You kind of need to think about level design. You need to think about math, and you need to think about systems and all that stuff. So my question is, after all, games are about having fun. Like, even if it's like very complex or maybe very simplistic narrative games, it's still about having some fun. So how do you kind of tackle and measure this when you understand that it's actually fun? So I know that in mobile game companies, you mentioned Zynga, like, and all the others, they do pay a lot of attention to, like, counting and doing conversions and understanding it's figuring out how much time does the player spend in the meta gameplay and those circles they kind of twirl around and to make sure that the user is always in the system. And if you look at, like, companies like Facebook, they're basically doing the same thing. So they're kind of injecting those endorphins and so on. But how do you approach this? Like, when do you understand that the game is actually fun to play? And is it like mechanics? Is it testing? Like, when do you understand this?
It's, to me, in my personal opinion, I think it's a balance of both. It has to be a little bit of my gut instinct, a little bit of that doesn't feel right, and that's that unquantifiable thing that's a little bit of experience. It's a little bit of just me as a gamer and what I like and things like that. So there's a lot of that to it that I do. I think part of my job and why I'm good at what I do is I have good instincts, and that's not true necessarily for everybody. And so then they'll fall back on data collection. But if it's purely instinctual and I build just what I want, that's fun for me, but is that fun for what my users want, right? And then is that fun for what the users in China want versus the users in Germany versus the users in America, who are all completely different markets, right? So if you're not even understanding what fun is in context of our today's worldwide markets, like, how do you design something that's fun? Because I'll put my own background, ethnic spin on things of what I like as a white male versus, what is somebody that's in another country who's female, who's whatever wants, right? And so we have to be more aware of these things, that fun, again, is this very subjective thing to ourselves. That's where we have to be careful about it. And as we collect data and get opinions from people, we do it as broadly as possible. And that's where focus groups and focus testing and things like that become a bridge to kind of understand, what different markets want. So we can try to validate our opinions and our gut instinct through focus tests and stuff like that. Then as we implement a little bit farther along, then we can start to collect data and use that data to try to validate, our stuff and then tweak it. And then occasionally walk away from it. And we're crazy, like, yep, I was stupid. I'm a dumbass. So, like, I got to move on. That was a bad idea. And being, willing to walk away from bad ideas or completely throw them out and change them, because we do make a lot of mistakes as game designers. And that's just part of what we do, and that's it, because there is kind of a lot of magic to it. And that's that thing that's hard. And that's why the job, like I said, and even dealing with executives, it's hard because, again, like, if you're an artist and an executive might be like, yeah, it's okay. But most executives are not going to give you a very strong opinion on the art, if it's good or bad. They're definitely not going to look at your code and tell a programmer if it's bad coding. But everybody is going to look at your game design and tell you how to do your job, because everybody has an opinion on what fun is. And everybody's opinion is different. And so you have to build thick skin, even as a designer, and know how to stand up for your ideas and communicate that. Communication is like 80% of our job. The soft skills, you can't underestimate, like, how much you need to be a great communicator as a game designer. We don't sit in a room and work on our computer all day. We are out in the middle of everything, constantly talking to everybody and trying to make this work. So it looks pretty, it's fun, it's functional, it works with engineering, it works with our game engine. It's fun. We keep adjusting everything constantly, and we're just always that social butterfly within the team that, that part's critical. But part of that is, while we're doing that, is getting everybody's opinions. right? And we're building the
Mhm.
consensus with our own team as well and getting outside of ourselves. So
Troy, so let's talk a little bit about how we can teach people these skills. Like you mentioned, a lot of different things right now. And how do you teach them in the game designer diploma course that you're teaching with CG Spectrum? So, what are like the maybe the core things that you approach there? What are the directions that you're taking, and what are the like the main building blocks that you're kind of building real game designers from?
it's tough. I went through a lot of self-reflection and analysis and various things when I was developing this program, because it's not an easy question. Like, how do you teach somebody what I've learned in 30 years? Like, how do I teach you in a year what I know, right? And it's almost impossible. And a lot of it, again, is very instinctual and things. But in my opinion, I start with a lot of foundation to your point of like, how do we talk? I'm sorry, how do we think logically? So a lot of my program, whether the students realize it or not, is about teaching them to think, teaching them to analyze, teaching them to understand and think about things in systems, and therefore breaking things down. Because if you just jump into something, right, you're going to get lost. It's so big, it's so complicated, you will be overwhelmed, and you'll just you'll flail around. Versus when you break things down into pieces and you think about things, you analyze things, and you think about stuff logically, then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to tackle the whole puzzle at once. I can do this one little section, then this one little section, bring together. So it's that critical thinking skill is the first and foremost thing that I'm really trying to get them to understand. The second is process. So that's kind of related. But what I find is the secret, in my opinion, to big companies, Microsoft, your EAs, Sony, people like that, the reason they've had success after success, not always 100%, but they have a much higher track rate of success than most other teams. The reason they do that is for their process. They understand there's a process to making games in the same way movies and everything else, right? You go about them in a certain way. You don't just jump in. It's like, hey, we're making a game today, and let's just sit down and start coding stuff. Like, that's not how we make games. We make games, by designing them, breaking them down, understanding the competition, and writing documents, and then, slowly building and testing things and stuff. So understanding that process and how to like write design documents and pitch decks and things like that is the first foundational thing. And some teams don't do that. But if you don't understand that, the logic of that process, it's not teaching you how to think and how to analyze a problem. So for example, in like level design, I see this every day as students, and even just professional designers will just jump in and then they start building something on Unreal. You're like, what are you building? Oh, I'm building a level. I'm like, what level? What's in the level? Like, what weapons are going to go there? What enemies are there? Oh, we'll figure it out later. Well, I'm just building the level and it's going to be fun. And you're like, but what's in the level? Like, and they don't think through. They just start, it's like writing a book and starting with page 1, paragraph 1, once upon a time, blah, 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 and trying to write a book that way. By the 10th page, you're like, what happens next? I don't know. I haven't planned it out. I'm just sort of making things up. And then I realize I made mistakes and I go back. Or like trying to build a house without a floor plan. Yeah, you'll eventually build a house, but it's going to cost you a lot more money. It's going to be a lot harder, right? So you've got to learn how to plan. You've got to learn how to build and design. And that design thinking is really, an important part. To me, tools are just tools. And so I had to make a conscious choice. I can't teach everything in this year in this program. And so while we do teach you some of the fundamentals of Unreal, we do, we kind of make that as like Unreal's part of the course and you're building things in it, but you're using a lot of third-party, like Epic, tutorials and things like that. I don't spend my time trying to teach you how to push buttons because, I can teach you Unreal and your first job is going to be inevitably in Unity or it's going to be in another engine. Like engines are just engines, right? And Photoshop is just a tool as well as anything else. So tools are going to constantly change and evolve. I don't need to teach you tools. You got to learn how to learn your own tools. I need to teach you how to make fun. That's the unquantifiable that you don't easily go read a book and learn about, right? And so that the program is really here to foundationally teach you, what is a great game, how to respect your users, and how to build something that they want, and how to get to that thing and, and how to iterate on your ideas and stuff like that. And so that's really where we're focused. That doesn't mean you're not going to learn tools in it, but you're going to learn tools through the process of doing things, not just a class of like, okay, here's this button and this is what this does, right? It's really in the context of actually building real world projects. And so through the course of our program, you'll actually build 3 small game prototypes and things in Unreal and things like that. So you'll learn a lot just in building those 3 prototypes.
Troy, I have a question kind of related to that. I think you described like a very interesting case was the level design and the smaller things, like the small assignments that you can do. So I I never tire of this example, but when you mentioned this about the level design thing, I always think about Nintendo and how they're doing the Mario games.
Hmm.
And when they're starting on the Mario games, be that Mario Odyssey or like the older titles, they first invent the mechanics. So
Yeah.
what the guy is going to do? Is he gonna jump on a hat, or he's gonna shoot like fireballs or whatever is there? And then as they introduce new mechanics into the game, they kind of build the levels around them. And that's why whenever you start like a new level in Mario or somewhere, it's always new. Like you're always kind of, constant journey. You're constantly developing and growing there. So can you talk with us a little bit about how do you teach your students to think about these mechanics? Like how do you figure out what the action is? Is it like how do you build something around jumping, or how do you build something about whatever, right? How do you work on this? How do you iterate, and how do you kind of grow into a game from that mechanic or the process that you're introducing to the user?
So for me, what I find is most important is because games have evolved so much in the last 20 years, they're more known. Like, we understand more how to build a Mario game or how to build a first person shooter, things like that. And so a lot of those problems have kind of been quote unquote solved. And so I try to get them to start with like what's new, what's unique, what's original. And whereas Mario would start with like, how do I jump? And they would just polish like the jump till for months, right? Just getting jump perfect, and then they move on to double jump, and then they move on to they get each of those things done, and that's a totally valid way to go. But you also have to kind of think about it's a bit more of an agile methodology. And again, some teams work that way where it's just like let's get all the little things done. But the problem is if you don't understand what the core game experience is, then how does jump fit into the other things? And is jump going to have an attack on it, and is jump going to have something else on it? And do I have a wall bounce off of that? So you could waste a lot of time perfecting jump and then realizing like, oh wait, now jump's got to be modified in a bunch of ways. And so I try to get them to think holistically about everything kind of at once a little bit. And
Uh-huh.
so don't deep dive into anything too deeply. You have to be really careful about all the system mechanics, and that also includes the world building and the world design and the story. And so I like to do a quick pass on the mechanics and then think about that it might be a pre-existing world. You might have Star Wars or something that you got to fit that into, and then or you might be building a new universe, but you got to do a little bit of world building as well to say like, do these mechanics fit with my character, with my
Makes sense.
levels, my world, and then kind of go back and forth with those a little bit. So at that mile high level, like a feature might only be defined in a half a page or a quarter page or a couple bullet points. It doesn't need to be a deep full design. You're just kind of giving a high level of what it is. And then do these things all fit together? Does the pieces kind of fit? You don't need to know they perfectly fit, but you got to kind of say like, okay, is this going to kind of edge towards the right way? And then you keep refining them over and over until they finally like, okay, now they fit. And by doing that, you make sure that you focus more on what's innovative, what's new, what's unique. That's what I call the pillars of the game. And so I want the kids to have 3 to 5 pillars that they can sell to ultimately you would be selling that to the consumer. But even if you're selling your idea to the CEO or the lead game designer or whoever that is, somebody above you has to buy off on do you want to make this game? And if you have more than 3 to 5 things that are new and unique, you're doing too much. If you only have one thing, you're probably not doing enough, right? And so it's about like defining those things first versus to me working on jump, because those are the risks. Those 3 to 5 things, if you can't get those right, you might as well walk away now, right? If those aren't fun. Like I've had people pitch ideas where they're like, what if you had a tornado in the game? This thing could go all around. I'm like, cool. Yeah. So what do you do with the tornado? Well, I don't know. There's just a tornado and it's fun. Like, come back to me when I understand what does the tornado mean in the game. That's not the game. Like that's an element out of the game, but that's not the game, right? And so those are the kinds of things where you have to understand those things. But if it's just, I see this all the time from a lot of people. They think, well, I can take Call of Duty, I'll put a new story on it, I'll set it in, Vietnam or wherever, some new location, or I'll fast forward 50 years, and that's the game. I'm like, So you're going to reuse 100% of all the gameplay mechanics out of Call of Duty? Like, no, like, they're just going to go play Call of Duty. Like, what are you going to do to make a better game? What are you going to do to make a user experience? Why is somebody going to give you $60 or whatever to buy this game?
Yeah,
And
I think
right?
this is like a very, very interesting and very wise approach, actually. It very ties down to the even how you do business, right? So if you don't have a competitive advantage, like how are you gonna survive? Like, and if you don't
Yeah.
know if this is gonna relate to your customer, like why are we even doing this? And I guess it kind of all ties down to like the design document that you mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the kind of artifact that I know a lot of people are kind of neglecting building
Yeah.
because a lot of them, first of all, they don't know really what should go in there, right? So because you don't really go online and find some kind of like a template or something, but maybe you kind of give some recommendations or maybe some examples of good design documents and what should be in that it should be like a lot of spreadsheets with stats. Should it be like your monetization technique? Should it be introduction into your world, or maybe all of those things? Like what is included in the document?
Yeah, ultimately it's everything. I call them a living document, right? So they're design documents are never done. You never say like, "Hey guys, here's 500 pages, go build this." Like that's not a smart way to work, right? That is an old school way, and you might in the end have 500 pages, but it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, right? And so everything has to someday at some time eventually be done. How to be a great game designer is knowing when to work on what and when and how and why, right? So, and like how much detail do you put into something? Because I've seen teams literally go spend 3 or 4 months just working on the story, and they'll just like get this amazing story. And I'm like, well, what's the game? Well, I don't know. We'll figure that out later. I'm like, yeah, and you're going to throw away your story and you're going to start your story over once you figure out what the game mechanics are, and that kind of thing. So at some point that GDD needs the whole story in it. It just doesn't need it in there day one. So the real trick there is not getting intimidated by, oh, I've got to write 100 pages or 500 pages or whatever. It's about how much do I need today to keep my team working, and to make sure that we're heading in the general right direction that can course correct a little bit as I go and as I implement things and actually touch it and feel it to see if it's fun. That's really the key to success, because it ultimately is going to be everything. I mean, that's the thing is if you play a game, every single little teeny tiny detail in that somebody thought about, somebody designed, somebody had a conscious thought of like, what color is that pixel? What is he wearing here? How fast is he moving? Like every one of those little teeny tiny details, and there's millions of them, like somebody somewhere had to decide on that, right? And then if that decision cannot get relayed to your team to be properly implemented, then you're in trouble, right? And it doesn't mean that it's going to be implemented perfectly, but you got to implement it close enough that and that's where like prototyping, rapid prototyping, things like that, you got to know like, okay, is this risky? Like, is this something new and innovative that we've never done before? Yeah. Okay, then let's figure this out first before we get in trouble. But if this is like jumping, look, okay, we've done that 1,000 times. I don't need to prove that I can get jumping working. But if it's some time travel, weird, dimensional shift, effect that's gonna, whatever, that nobody's ever done before, I better do that first, right? And also set a limit to that so that I don't spend a year trying to get that done out of, spend 12 months of my 18 months just getting that one feature trying to work, and I've still got 1,000 other features to implement. I've seen teams fail for doing that too. They get so obsessed with trying to get that one thing working, they literally just let the rest of the game, suffer, and then they get in trouble and either canceled or delayed, because they didn't, So that's that agile methodology process is good and bad. Because you can spin on one thing forever and not realize you got to move forward, right? And that's the challenge with game design, is knowing when to walk away from something. And so that design document process is the core of that problem, right? It's just it's really easy to over design too much on paper, and knowing when to go from paper to engineering it, and building it is really a fine line that takes a little bit of experience to kind of go. But every game's a little different. But again, it's about get what's core first and get what's special, those pillars and stuff, get all that figured out and get all that bought off, and then, figure out what the fat is. And so even things on like a game design document, I tell people like, look, build in fat, build in stuff, but know what your core center is. This cannot change. This has to be the game, but you've got some extra stuff here. And then if time runs out or whatever, you can start cutting some of that fat without like destroying your game. And so your game design document gets even more complicated because you've got to be able to like let people know like what's important, like what do we need to implement first, and that kind of stuff. And unless you've been doing, and even me doing this 25, 30 years, like it's still hard. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not, because also the problem is the technology and the platforms change every day, right? And so we have to like constantly reinvent the wheel. And so even if we have, like, a good example is Ratchet and Clank. So on Insomniac, when we were working on PS2 Ratchet and Clanks, we could build levels very quickly. Like we had the process down, we had the pipeline down, we had the tools, we had everything. And on PS2, like we could build levels really fast. And so we could literally, we didn't have to do a lot of paper design. We'd already done it, 5 times or whatever. And we could build levels just incredibly fast. So we just jumped in a lot of times without doing a lot of paper design. But when we came to the PS3, the technology had advanced so much from PS2 to PS3 that a process that used to take weeks suddenly took many months, like 6 months. So it went from just like 3 weeks to 6 months in a process difference, just because the technology was so different, and the fidelity and the quality. And so every time we have these generational hardware platform leaps, we have to almost rethink our pipelines, our processes, and how we work. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Is as soon as we get comfortable, it all changes, And so as soon as we figure it out, we gotta change it again. And that's one of the banes of a game designer's, job.
You mentioned a couple of times during the conversation the agile methodologies and how you were kind of like evangelizing them and introducing them to the students. Why do you think they work so well for game design and for games in general? It feels like, I mean, if anyone listening, I mean, it goes into like the safe methodologies and like any development, software development, and the core idea there is that you build something and then you test it and then you build around it. You either fix it or you build the next one, and it's just like the constant delivery and constant development and constant discovery of whatever your player or the final consumer wants, right? So do you think they work, these methodologies, they work better in games now than, let's say, waterfall, when somebody comes in and says, I want to build a game like you mentioned, like Call of Duty, but in sci-fi setting and so on and so forth? Or maybe they open up new opportunities to kind of prototype more and to get more ideas out? Where do you think they are better?
It's hard, because I think that if you look at agile methodology in its purest form, from where it originated at Microsoft, back when, it didn't take into account the complexities of something like games. And so games can, they're definitely their own beast. And so while many of the agile
they're even harder. They're
yes.
even harder.
Yeah, extremely hard. And so people who don't understand agile, and how to adapt it to games, fail quite often. I've worked with a lot of teams that try to use agile and they call it agile, and it might have been agile in its purest form, but they didn't adapt it in the right way to make games. And so I think that's the mistake. You really need to look at your process. It's not about agile or waterfall, but about that methodology of what works right for you, your team, your project, your company. And two teams at the same company might want to work a little different, right? And your team size has a lot to do with it. Like a bigger team needs more process. A bigger team needs more stuff, and is going to have more people doing the same things. And so a waterfall methodology might be being used, say, by the art team. Whereas like with my art teams, I run them with a more agile methodology up through prototyping, and then I switch them into a waterfall methodology. So I use hybrid methods there because, again, once I figured out that first thing and I just said, okay, I need 1,000 more, then that's where waterfall is great, right?
Yeah.
But can I design it all into a 500-page document and then say, here, go build all this in a waterfall model? Not always. Occasionally. Like if it's a sequel, if it's a game we've done a couple of, if it's things like that, we might know a lot more information and be able to use a little bit more of a waterfall methodology. Mm-hmm. Okay. But I'm just a big believer in figuring out what works for you, but I do think that our industry is suffering right now and that we don't have good tools on a project management side, and even on a scheduling side. I think that's I've actually thought about doing a company to do that, but it's not cost effective. I mean, it's not lucrative. It's something we could monetize. The industry's not big enough, not enough people willing to change that we couldn't make enough money to do it. But I do think there's a huge hole in our industry right now about the software tools used and the methodologies used, and how do we track all that stuff, and how do we do that. It's not, it goes beyond just scheduling. There's a lot more complications about project management and managing the processes there that are driving a lot of teams crazy right now. And so there's no, I've never seen two teams run the same way. It's all over the place.
Yeah, it's all over the place, and as well as in VFX, actually, it's the same kind of problem, because they do have a lot of iterations, and there's a lot of things changing, and there's like creative vision and all that stuff, and it all influences the time of delivery and all that stuff. But sorry, I kind of digress. So
That's okay.
in your opinion, like in your head, like who is the like game design diploma for? Like who's the who do you want to kind of address with this product education, whatever you call it? Like who is the person who's going to benefit most?
Well, anybody that's just interested in getting a job either as a game system designer or a game level designer. And that's really the two primary jobs that I focus on. And they are related, meaning, if you don't understand how to jump and the mechanics, it's hard to build levels. And if you don't understand, if you're a level designer and you don't understand things, that they both kind of need to have a little bit of knowledge of themselves, even though the jobs are very different. Those are the two main things that I teach. There's dozens of other jobs that you could potentially go get, like a narrative designer or whatever, that have some other specialties in there. But it really is looking to teach people who want to do entry level, game design stuff. We are focused on teaching you how to build games at AAA studios. And so we are really focused, a lot of our mentors, we got an amazing set of mentors on our team, and all of them come from big studios. We got a lot of guys from Ubisoft and EA and other companies that, have phenomenal track records. And so we are really focused on teaching you how to build big AAA games. Now, that being said, I've had a number of students come through that want to do indie games, want to build their own games and do that own stuff. And we do support people that have their dreams and, and have the other stuff. And I've worked with people that are literally building their own mobile game while we're in the course, and they've actually even released them commercially during the course. So we have kind of all walks of life, people. We have people that are coming in fresh out of high school, and I've got people retraining at 40, that are coming out of another career in a completely different industry, and just are interested in games. And so the program will adapt to no matter what your skill set is. We've even had a couple of guys that came from the mobile game industry. Also, we're PC console focused. We do a little bit of mobile, but not a lot right now. And we're really just decided to focus on PC console and using Unreal. And so I've had a couple of guys that were in working 3 to 5 years in mobile game design and actually tried to get a job on PC console and couldn't, because they're such different worlds. PC, and they're literally two different jobs, even going from mobile to PC console. And they've now come and taken the course just to learn PC console design. And now, even though they had been working as a professional designer, they didn't have the skill set to go to PC console. So that's the challenge of this industry. Even say you're a first-person shooter designer, like try to go over and design a real-time strategy game. You can't do it. Like the foundation's kind of there, but they're totally. It's like learning French and German. Like they're kind of related, but a lot of different rules, right? So there's a lot of that foundation of these things that are very similar. But when you really get down to like how do you really design this thing, it's tough. And so we're also focused on teaching more mainstream game genres, action, adventure, role playing, things like that that you would build. We don't really get into strategy games and puzzle games and a lot of those 100 other genres, sports games and stuff, because it's just too much. I try to teach so what's more mainstream and what's got the best chance of getting you a job. That's what we focus.
So a lot while we are wrapping up this thing. So when does the course start? How can you apply? Do you need to go through some kind of like evaluation before it and that kind of stuff, or you just apply and click the link and that's it?
Yeah, there's no we don't need to have a portfolio or anything like that. Yeah. We take everybody. We've learned to work with, again, whether you have absolutely no previous experience or skills or anything, all the way to people that have been working professionally. We've got all ranges, and they all have been successful in the program. So that's not a problem for us. It's not quite the same as, say, being an artist where you might need to know how to draw before you go into a 3D modeling class or something like that. We start with more foundational, stuff there. The course starts every month. So we have intakes to the first of every month. And then you can just go to cgspectrum.com and, you can sign up there. And if you have, questions, there's a info@cgspectrum.com email that you can email, and our admin, people can help you through. And in a lot of cases, I talk to people and they're not sure if they should be a game designer or game programmer or what they want to be when they grow up, kind of thing. And so we try to help you through that process of understanding what's right for you. We do have courses in game programming and other things as well. And we actually have had, I would say, I don't know the exact number, I'd say it's 40% of our students or more have finished even the game design course and stayed in CG Spectrum for another year or more. And they're now taking 3D modeling, or they're taking programming, or they're taking other things, because they've realized that even a year of game design just kind of barely gets you prepared. It's a crash course. And something to know too is the course is 20 hours a week minimum. Like, and the people that are failing out is there's some students that come in, they spend 1 to 3 hours a week on the course, and they fail and they don't know why. And it's like, well, I told you it's 20 hours a week. And so the course right now, you have like 3 to 5 hours a week of videos to watch, which is me rambling on like I'm doing now, endlessly, as a classroom experience, right? And there are videos you can watch and rewatch and rewind. So to me, it's much better than watching a live person, because you can really, digest it. And then you spend about 15 hours a week doing assignments and, and things like that. But you really got to put the effort in to be a game designer. It's not easy. And if you're going to put in the minimal, then I tell people, don't do it. If your heart's not in it, if you're busy working and other stuff, I understand. But, you really got to put in 15 to 20 hours a week. And a lot of our students are putting in 40. It really is a super intensive course. But even in that, in a year, it's just like, it's like trying to be a doctor in a year. I mean, it's just, you can kind of learn those basics, but it really, I can't underestimate, how hard this course, how hard just the job is, right? And so you will benefit if you can go take some additional classes and things like that. But at the end of this course, you would be potentially at least able to go. I have had, a number of students now have graduated and gone and gotten jobs. So it's not impossible, but it's the students that are putting in those 20 or 30 hours a week and really highly motivated. They're the ones getting jobs, coming out of this, because it really, so if you want to learn, you want to be serious, you can get a job out of it. If you're going to do it halfway, you probably won't. So that's the harsh reality.
I got it. Okay. Well, Troy, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for telling a little bit about the course and about your career, about all the stuff, gameplay. I could talk about this like for hours and hours, but I know that you probably have other stuff to do. So thank you so much, and we will add the links in the description so people can jump on and register and learn
and
more.
Also my live stream, if you point them to that on YouTube, there's over 100 hours now of there's 50 episodes now, 52 episodes at 2 hours each. So there's over 100 hours of content of me jabbering on YouTube. And then, all the other mentors have it. So I think we have like 1,000 hours now on YouTube of content, but I have whole like 2-hour-long conversations just on like every job, everything that's related to like how to get a job and all that kind of stuff. It's all up on my YouTube channel, for the CG Spectrum channel in YouTube. So, if you want to put a link to that, that would be great as well. And that would be kind of the next place to look if people still have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon again.
Yeah, anytime. I'm happy to do this. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.